The biggest strategic mistake that the United States is making in this contest against China is that it has launched this contest without a strategy. Because China knows that the dream of the United States is to make China the second Soviet Union that collapses. Every country in the world says, oh, this infrastructure is good. I need Chinese fast trains, I need Chinese highways. And then would you join a containment policy? You won't. Instead of trying to stop China, the United States should try to work with China to create a world which has enough space for two big powers.
So you said that all the Americans agree on one thing, which is like to stop China. So does that mean like the US has like a strategy or a grand strategy to stop China? Or it's like more related to each president and his way of dealing with China?
Well, I'm glad you used the words grand strategy. Because when I was writing my book, Has China Won?, I had the privilege of having a very long one-on-one lunch with someone who was then clearly America's greatest living strategic thinker, Henry Kissinger. It was a long lunch, hour and a half, 2 hours. And at the end of the lunch, when I went back, I asked myself, what was the message that Henry Kissinger was trying to give to me at this one-on-one lunch? And it became clear to me after I reflected on my conversation with him that the message he was telling me was that the biggest strategic mistake that the United States is making in this contest against China is that it has launched this contest without a strategy. I thought, gosh, that's a very profound thing to say. So I had to write to him. I wrote to Henry Kissinger and I said, Dear Henry, thank you for the lunch. Do you mind if I cite you saying this in my book? And fortunately, he gave me his permission. So the fact that someone as senior and as well-informed as Henry Kissinger can say that there's no strategy is a very important point. And it's also confirmed by the evidence, right? While we know for sure that the United States will carry out actions in one way or another against China, it's not clear what the goal is. I mean, is the goal to stop China's economic development? It cannot be done. Is the goal to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? It cannot be done. Is the goal to successfully contain and isolate China like the way the United States successfully isolated and contained Soviet Union? It can't be done. So if it's not clear what the goals are, people are asking, you've launched this contest, what is your end game? What will constitute a victory for you? And as you know, that has never been spelled out by anybody. Except once, I think, President Joe Biden in passing mentioned, saying the Chinese aim to become number one, and he said, it ain't gonna happen on my watch. So basically what he's saying, I will not allow Chinese economy to overtake the US economy while I'm still president. So clearly, if you look at all the actions that have been taken, the tariffs, the chip war, they're all designed in one way or another to slow down the Chinese economic growth. Because I think the United States has made, in some ways, a rational calculation that if and when the Chinese economy becomes number one, everything changes. And the very privileged position that the United States has had for, by the way, 130, 140 years as the number one power in the world, that can change. And here I want to emphasize that I do believe, and this is also a result of my conversation with Henry Kissinger, that there is a wiser strategy for the United States. instead of trying to stop China, United States should try to work with China to create a world which has enough space for two big powers. And that was also, by the way, a strategy that the former President Bill Clinton suggested in a speech that he gave in Yale in 2003. And in my book, Has China Won? I cite the speech he gave where he said, Bill Clinton said, if the US is going to be number one forever, then we can keep on doing what we are doing. But he added a but. He said, but if we can conceive of a world where we are no longer number one, then surely it's in the United States' interests to build multilateral institutions, multilateral processes, multilateral rules, multilateral norms that will in one way or another constrain China. And that would be a wiser strategy. So those of us who are friends of the US and friends of China should therefore be advocating to both of them, why don't you adopt a wiser strategy that will be better for both of you and better for us, instead of this rather destructive zero-sum game that is being played out now.
So you just said like the United States doesn't have any strategy regarding China. Let's go to the other side. How about the Chinese? Do they have a grand strategy in dealing with the US?
Well, as the weaker party, if they didn't have a strategy, they'd be in deep trouble. I think out of necessity, they have to have a strategy. And they do have one. So, for example, they ask themselves the obvious question. Why did United States successfully defeat the Soviet Union? Why? And they must say, the one country that has studied the collapse of the Soviet Union more carefully than any country in the world is China, because China knows that the dream of the United States is to make China the second Soviet Union that collapses. So how does China prevent a collapse? First point, the Soviet Union didn't collapse because of external pressures. It collapsed because of internal weaknesses. And so China realizes, to make sure I survive, I must have a very strong, dynamic economy and a strong, dynamic society. And by the way, there was a very famous American thinker, George Kennan, who said way back in 1949, very presciently he said, at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest between United States and Soviet Union will depend not on our weapons and troops and all that. It will depend on which society has got greater spiritual vibrancy inside, stronger. And so United States society was far more dynamic than Soviet Union society. United States thrived, Soviet Union collapsed. So the Chinese know that the first priority is to make sure your economy is strong and your society is strong, which is why they're massively educating their people and growing their economy so that they don't become a second Soviet Union. The second thing the Chinese learned from the collapse of the Soviet Union was that the United States succeeded because it managed to get a lot of the neighbors of the Soviet Union to join the containment policy everywhere. Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, right? Both ends of the Soviet Union. So what did the Chinese do? The Chinese launched a preemptive strike against a containment policy by making sure that its neighbors depended on the Chinese economy. I'll give you a simple example. Singapore is part of Southeast Asia, and we are part of an organization called ASEAN. And ASEAN started as a pro-American organization, okay? In fact, when ASEAN was created on August 8, 1967, both the Soviet Union and China denounced the creation of ASEAN as a pro-American organization, right? And it's true, ASEAN was pro-American, pro-Western. And what was stunning was that even though ASEAN was pro-American, pro-Western, and we had longer dialogues with United States, European Union, Australia, Japan, everybody, none of our Western friends proposed a free trade agreement to ASEAN. The first country to propose a free trade agreement to ASEAN was China in 2001. And the impact of that China-ASEAN agreement was phenomenal. Because in the year 2000, and that's when China proposed the free trade agreement, ASEAN's trade with the United States was 135 billion, and our trade with China was only 40 billion. So US trade was, more than 3.5 times what China's trade with ASEAN was. But as a result of the free trade agreement, by 2022, even though ASEAN's trade with the United States has gone from 135 to 450, 500 billion, an increase of over 3 times, China's trade with ASEAN went from 40 billion to $975 billion, almost $1 trillion. The world's largest trading relationship in 2022. So that was then there's no way ASEAN can join a containment policy against its largest trading partner, right? It's crazy. So that's that's part of the Chinese strategy. And I mentioned a third one very quickly. You take the Belt and Road Initiative that China has launched, building infrastructure in all corners of the world. What does that mean? Every country in the world says, oh, this infrastructure is good. I need Chinese fast trains, I need Chinese highways. And then would you join a containment policy? You won't. So it shows you that they have systematically worked out a grand strategy. But at the same time, I can tell you that the Chinese also have a lot of respect for the United States. They understand that United States as a power is a remarkable power. And so their challenge is, even with all this strategy, they cannot underestimate what the United States can eventually do.
What do you guys think? Do you have anything to add on top of this conversation? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.